Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out on a Monday evening. We know it's not always easy after a long day. My name is Lisa Tarquini, and I'm the founder of the Menopause Space. I set this up 3 years ago because of my own journey with menopause at the age of 32. I'm very privileged to be sitting in front of you today, and I'm excited to have this conversation with Mary.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. And oh my gosh, what a pleasure that we're the first event in this space. I feel really honored that the team have taken on this topic as well as the first topic to launch into this space. And I think that says a lot about how far we are going with our culture in Hong Kong, that we are open to these conversations in these spaces. So thank you so much for having us as well. And I'm so excited to chat to you about this, Lisa. This has been in the works for a little bit of time. We've been talking about getting together and having one of these conversations for almost a year, I would say. And so I feel really honored to have this chat with you in this space. And I think it's really special that we get to share that with everyone here tonight, because it is a more intimate conversation. And that's the style that we're going to have with our talk tonight. Definitely more personal, hopefully more relatable, and I would say corporate friendly, but we want it to be down to earth. We want it to be a safe space. I'd like to be able to speak frankly because we're all adults. How do you feel?
Oh, I'm all over being frank and maybe oversharing. So this is going to be a really cool conversation, but we do invite you to butt in, put your hand up, ask questions if you'd like. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions, please feel free to just write it on the piece of paper and pop it in here, and we'll answer it at the end. Okay, so conversations about sex in general and intimacy are often taboo. Growing up Irish Catholic, didn't really know anything about it, didn't learn much about it. But even now, moving into the space that I'm in with menopause, and obviously we talk about midlife, it's so important that we do communicate about this, because relationships break, marriages break because of a lack of communication and knowledge around this time. So Mary, firstly, you are a sexologist.
That is correct.
What is a sexologist?
Yes. Great question. And I get asked this a lot. So this is a good question for us to start with. So thank you for opening that up. A sexologist is someone who is contributing to the understanding of human sexuality. And sexology is an academic field of study. It is a social science. And you can be a certified sexologist like I am. So I've actually done inclusive training to be certified as an inclusive sexologist, which means that I'm interested in the broad spectrum of human experiences with sexuality, not just heteronormative sexuality, which is often what we learn when we're in school. And we don't really learn much outside of that. But sexologists, it's a broad discipline. So they can be doctors, they can be nurses, there is that element of medicine to the field, whereas my background is in law, politics, or political science. I have a master's in social science, and I've spent many years working in corporate in Hong Kong. So my area of interest is in human behavior, relationships, and the art and science of intimacy, because I'm also a creative person. And so I'm interested in how can we experience intimacy, and why do we have challenges in midlife? Why are we seeing these trends? Why is it not getting better, even though we have access to so much wellness now? Why are we still seeing this? So that is the area that I'm interested to dive into as a sexologist. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's so exciting for me to be having this conversation with you. It's it's a new area that I'm being more confident in myself, actually having these conversations. And I suppose I would like to talk a little bit about my own personal story, and the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I don't think that my story is unique. But I met my husband on a beach in Dubai, and I left the Middle East then and went to live with him in Rome, had the most romantic love story, a colourful sex life, and then I got cancer, and twice. And chemotherapy shut off my ovaries 2 weeks after my 32nd birthday, which propelled me into menopause, a topic that I knew zero about because my mum didn't talk about it. And we don't get taught it in school. And obviously none of my friends were going through it. So I couldn't have a conversation with anybody about it. When I was going through treatment, I had to have a considerable amount of radiotherapy, both internally and externally. And I also had my cervix removed. So I have this huge stitch where my cervix used to be, which is like a wall. And then after the radiotherapy, I was given these wonderful cylinders, which are a little bit like what's on the table across there. And I had to, the oncologist said that I had to use the cylinders, pick the cylinder that represents your partner's size, and use that for maybe an hour a day. And then we had to, engage in, obviously, sex. But when you've had trauma in and around this area, mentally you're a little bit, all over the place. But anyway, we were sitting in the oncology room and she said that we had to, have intercourse to keep the scar tissue from, closing everything up. So he was like, what, this is medicine? This is, how many times a week? And she said, well, what's the average? We were in Belfast. And she said, what's the average, like, Lisa, 2 to 3 times a week? And I'm like, shut up, Anne. We're in my parents' house. We're sleeping in my single bed, me and my sister's single bed in my old room. I'm like, bloody hell. My hot Italian husband, Anyway, so I had to put out 2 to 3 times a week and use these cylinders once a day as well. And then after that, we came to Hong Kong and I started work. So then you go through a lot of other mental issues with menopause. Women, we get brain fog and anxiety and memory loss, and I felt like an imposter in my job. So I was dealing with all of that in the day, and I didn't feel that I wanted to have this as part of the relationship. I didn't want to be touched because I was just so exhausted from having to keep up a kind of, persona at work. And it put a strain on our relationship. I didn't know how to communicate about it. And he didn't know how to communicate about it. And we had a wobble. And then when we went through couples counselling, I learned for the first time in my late 30s that being intimate was different than having sex. And I was like, what? Like, no, that is not the same thing. So these relationship challenges are not unique. And I'm sharing my personal story to, not just make it all about me, but to highlight that every single one of us in this room is going through a challenge, I'm sure, or would like to change something or enhance something. And the more we talk about our own stories and lived experiences, hopefully that will break down the barriers to accessing resources like Mary to make it a little bit better. So if I can just go back again, because I do have memory loss and I've forgotten. So what is the difference between...
Thank you for sharing that, though.
That's okay.
That's amazing. I mean, how many talks have you been to where someone actually shares something so real and genuine about something that's happened to them in their lives? So thank you, Lisa, for sharing that with us, because it really does bring the topic down to earth and it makes it real. So thank you.
You're welcome. So what is, I don't know if anybody else, like, does anybody else need to know, like, what's the difference between intimacy and, like, the physical experience of sex?
It's an important question, and it's important because in our culture, we conflate the two. We're very much conditioned through the media, through films, through television and all sorts of things that we're exposed to assume that intimacy is just physical and intimacy is typically physical sex, which it's not really. Intimacy is very broad and it's about human connection. And it's important to, I guess, distinguish between the two, between sex and intimacy, because it looks and feels different depending on who you are as an adult. If you're neurodivergent, what your preferences are, maybe you don't like physical touch, and that's fine. So maybe you're not that into physical sexual intimacy, and maybe the sensory experience of physical sex is a challenge. So being able to broaden our understanding of what sex can be and what intimacy is really does make us advance inclusion and actually progress culture in many ways, making it more inclusive. So yes, I would say intimacy is about the human connection, however that feels, whatever that looks like. It can be emotional, it can be intellectual, shared time, shared space. It can be physical touch, it can be giving, it can be receiving, whereas sex is typically associated with physical, sexual, penetrative sex, which what we can actually do is broaden that again to be play, to be having fun together and experimenting. And there's a lot within that that we can also unpack that has many benefits. But yes, it's much broader than what we have been conditioned to think. And when we realize that, it's a very powerful piece of knowledge to have. And it makes us better understand who we are as individuals and also who we might be with in a relationship and what they might like or dislike as well. So it's a very powerful piece of knowledge to have, to understand that sex and intimacy are much broader and can be, limitless in terms of its possibilities. Yeah.
I love that you shared that. And I feel, how do we then, it's the communication, because like you said, it's so unique and it comes in many different colors and layers for, all individuals. It doesn't have to be just the male and the female. So it's owning your own wants and likes and to be able to communicate that. But that takes confidence. Yeah. Where do people get the confidence from?
Yes, and it's a shame that it takes confidence, because it shouldn't just be for people who are more outspoken or more comfortable in themselves to be able to express their likes and dislikes. But it's because of the culture that we live in that if you're not confident, you might actually not be able to express yourself the way that you genuinely should in order to enjoy intimacy and pleasure. And that also comes back to, the neurodivergent piece and being accepting of different communication styles for different adults. But yeah, the confidence piece, that's what just took me down that tangent too. We're both going down a few tangents tonight.
Yeah, but
we've prepared questions, but we're also trying to keep it as natural and as authentic as possible. So if you have questions along the way, if I say something that maybe takes me down a different path and you want to learn more, just honestly, we're an intimate group, so you can raise your hand or just shout out at any time.
So I just want to go back to the whole confidence thing. As girlfriends, we all have good old conversations, right? And I have one girlfriend in particular who was married for 8 years. She's not anymore to this person, but never had an orgasm with him because she didn't have the confidence to tell him and to talk to him about it. So she chose to be married to a man, have 3 children, and not have an orgasm with him, but obviously buy her own accessories to give herself an orgasm. It's like, for me, at one point, I said to her, over many glasses of wine, what's the point? But obviously, not always having sex is to climax. But it's a pretty cool point to come to, and if she hasn't had that. And that all came down to her confidence. And how, there's many of us in the room may have experienced that. So like within your work, what tools, like how do you help somebody to gain that confidence?
That's a good question. And that story actually made me think about my own mother as well, because I'm one of 4 kids, and she's not in the room, so it's fine if I share the story. But she told me, when I told her, I'm going to become a sexologist, Mum. Hey, by the way, quitting my job at the bank. Not for me anymore. I'm becoming a sexologist. She was like, oh my gosh, I want to tell you this story about how, she's now divorced from my father, but when they were together, she had 4 kids and she never had an orgasm. And it's since the divorce and when she was single that she felt confident enough to explore. And that story really hit home because, again, like if someone has children, we have all these assumptions that, well, they're having sex, but we don't think like that the quality of intimacy is there and that the quality of the experience is there. And the fact that it comes down to having time and space and having confidence, we need to change that. And I think that coming down to the root cause of the problem is also how I solve it, which is education. And not just education like you're in a classroom and I'm telling you something you don't want to hear, but sitting down with adults, which is what I do, and giving people knowledge about anatomy, knowledge about pleasure anatomy, which is something that we don't learn in school. And that's, okay, there's boundaries there, so I understand that. But there has to be a line between where are people going to find this information, if at all, and also why don't we proactively seek this out? And that's also to do with culture. We don't live in a culture that empowers us to learn more about our own bodies and pleasure because we have, I think, and what research tells us, this sort of internalized shame as well that comes with this. And that can be from culture, that can be from family. I also was raised in a Catholic household, so I think that also has part of how my parents raised us and their relationship with sexuality. But definitely the first strategy step that I have with clients who come to me who are in a position where they may never have had an orgasm before is really to start with anatomy and education. What does it look like? What does your body look like? And how are different areas of the body stimulated so that the brain releases the hormones that you need to have in your body for you to relax and for you as a human being to have an orgasm. And there's education that we don't get. So that's what makes what I do special, but also I wish it was more accessible. I wish it wasn't the case that it had to be like this. But yeah, that's definitely the first step. And I tailor it as well, sorry to cut you off, just to make sure that I'm giving someone the knowledge that is empowering them in their own body, mindful of the fact that not everyone wants physical touch. And as we age as well, we develop different comorbidities. So some people might have different traumas. They may not want certain parts of their body stimulated for different reasons. Potentially, penetrative sex can be painful because of psychosomatic responses, also to do with traumas. So that's why, like using the cylinders, for example, or the dilators, is an important tool for sexologist practitioners, but typically you do it with a doctor. So I wouldn't do it with you as a patient, but I could give you the knowledge and the tools to do it at home. But using dilators and training your brain to relax upon insertion can be very beneficial for women who experience pain during sex. That is often associated with shame or trauma, and there's a lot of processing to do with relaxing the body. And that's important because we might tense up or our brain might freeze for lots of different reasons. And we don't have that education to allow us to understand what do we need in order to receive pleasure that our brain and our bodies can give us.
So important.
A lot there.
There's a
lot to unpack with this, but it's a great question though. How do you give someone the confidence?
How do you give someone the confidence? And that, as women, as people move into midlife, so, midlife used to be our 40s. Now I think now we're aging. It's, you know, probably our 50s. But for the particular area that we're talking about is that hormonal shift, both with women and men. And for women, we'll start with women. So women move into perimenopause in their late 30s as the estrogen starts to decline in their body. And it's not linear, it's like whoop, 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 whoop. It's like a roller coaster. And some women experience it turbulently, and some women just, you know, actually, you know, calmly go through it. There are 50 associated symptoms with perimenopause. And they can range from the mental health issues, the psychological anxiety, the stress, and the brain fog, the memory loss, etc. But then also body changes, so changes in your abdominal area, where women's shape changes from having the hips where we are, you know, able to give birth to the abdominal fat area, which changes a woman's body confidence. And then also you have pelvic floor changes, which may be pelvic atrophy, vaginal atrophy. You may have more pain. Some women experience vaginal dryness. But then also you would have maybe that loss of libido because of the lack of the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, making the hormones that give us those, you know, those happy sex hormones. And this is a difficult transition for many, many women. And we will go on to men as well, because men do go through on this. So in your work, how do you support women navigating these changes?
Yes, good question. So I suppose just like you do with education, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm making it relevant to sexual wellness, because there's a gap there where it's very difficult to come into some, you know, environments and have these conversations so that they're accessible. And we don't learn about it in school. Just going back to school for a second. Raise your hand if you ever learnt about menopause in school. Never. We don't learn about the full life cycle of hormones. We end it with reproductive health. And it's still pretty much the same today. And Vera, who's going to speak later, she's creating a program or a platform for schools for comprehensive sexuality education. And she's also excited to talk about menopause as part of that, because we don't. And it also speaks to the value of female bodies and reproductive health, and really emphasizing that. So anything after that, well, no need to teach kids about that. And we kind of grow up in this society where you're not really going to hear about it, probably until you're in your 20s or 30s, maybe. Hopefully that will shift. But yeah, so coming back to that fundamental first point, I'm also talking about menopause from a sexual wellness perspective. And what I would add on from what Lisa just said is that the decline in estrogen impacts the thickness of the vaginal canal. So the vaginal canal is where the penis is inserted during sexual intercourse or an object. And what happens is the lining actually thins. Pre-menopause, it is thick and it's very elastic, and that is important for childbirth. That's why the vaginal canal is like that. But with perimenopause and menopause, post-menopause, it thins out, and that means that sexual intercourse becomes more painful. It means that the vaginal canal is more susceptible to rips and tearing, which also means that it's more susceptible to infections. So what can also happen is that because sex might be painful at this time, there is a strong theme in the research of avoidance. Because not every woman is confident to say, hey, it's a bit painful, can we not? The easier thing to do is just to avoid it and to back away from intimacy if you feel like that is the cue just for sex, right? So avoidance is a strong theme. It's very unfortunate, but what happens as a result of that is that the vaginal canal will actually shorten, which means that even with lubrication, sex can still be painful, which is why dilators can be very important to kind of keep it stretched, to keep the muscles moving. These are all muscles, right? And it's all tissue, and we need to keep it lubricated and strong. And that's why, no matter what age you are after midlife, we should all still be having or enjoying sexuality to keep the muscles strong, to keep our pelvic floor strong, and that's for both female and male bodies. That was a lot that I just said. If you have any questions, you're very brave. But I welcome you to ask them. Yes. Oh, okay, yes, yeah.
I went to my doctor recently, and I had, it was very embarrassing because, like, first, I have reported eczema, and I thought that I just had eczema around there, and it was itchy, it's still very itchy, but I go there, and it's just literally all around it, and it's just like, it drives me mad, but she says, you have vaginal dryness. I'm like, really? No. Like, no. And I was in shock, but it's, I'm in my mid-50s now, and I just keep thinking that it's just like, but it actually is dryness. So she gave me progesterone cream for that, but I found it very strange. Something happened, I got weird feelings around so I stopped putting on the cream. So what is another solution? What do you do? I mean, do you have any other products or things that could help?
So, good question. And I think it's really great that you went to see a doctor to talk about that and have that conversation, because again, a lot of people will avoid that if they think that there's something that they're not comfortable to talk about, right? So that's really good that you did that. And there are some clients who will have internal pessaries as well that can have hormones to balance out what the imbalance might be. The first step is always to get your hormones tested. When you get your hormones tested, and this is something that in midlife we should do as part of our regular bodily checkups, because an imbalance for male and female bodies can be a sign of chronic illnesses. It can be a sign of cancer. There can be a lot more going on that we want to detect early. And you can do that when you test your hormones as well. So when you test your hormones, you can understand where the imbalance is coming from. And then I work in a medical clinic where I see my clients one-on-one. And through that referral network, I can refer clients to a doctor straight away. But I know that there are internal options as well. There are external. And for many clients, using lubrication, which is something that Vera's going to talk about later, is the most helpful technique as well, to make sure that you can avoid the irritation that can happen with the skin internally and externally. But without more information, and also without being a doctor, that's the best response I can give you in this setting. But I can give you my card though.
There's also moisturizers as well. I think you're going to talk about that too, to just for your, it doesn't help. Right, yeah. The women's health physios at Joint Dynamics Evolve, they're incredible if you wanted to go and get some support. And they have some of the lubrications and stuff that you can think there's a couple of different types that you can test and hopefully get the right one for you. Because I heard this story, and I'm sorry to think the worst case scenario, but this comedian said she'd gone to a house party and she hadn't seen the woman in a while. She said, well, how are you doing? And the woman said, oh, I've got out of hospital. And she had her vaginal, she had the flaps, they were like sandpaper and they'd stuck together. Velcro. They were like Velcro. She had to get them surgically removed. You have to keep yourself lubricated, don't you? It's so important. Now, that's a really extreme case, but it's so important for women at this stage of life to continue to lubricate and moisturize. And she was standing up against the sink with a glass of wine, and this woman said, yeah, she had them had to pull them apart.
Oh my gosh.
And she didn't know what to say. It was okay, but that's worst case scenario. But it is important to keep yourself definitely moisturized, and also to keep the muscles strong. As Mary was saying, they do weaken, and also Vera is going to talk about some of the assistance that you can do with that. Constantly work on your pelvic floor, and you can do that just like with weight training, breathing, and it's not how we thought it was So there is a very specific technique to it, and Vera's going to, I'm sure, dip into that as well. But also, women's health physios are exceptional, and that's their job. And the girls at Joint Dynamics Evolve are very, very, they're experts in this area. So before I get on to the other end of women in midlife and all the hats we have to wear and all that stuff, let's talk about men, because men do go through a hormonal shift called andropause. And this can happen anytime between 45 and 55 as well, like women. And one of the side effects of that, again, like women, is loss of libido and erectile dysfunction. So how do you work with men in this space to assist them in becoming more confident moving forward? Because some men can retreat as well from their relationships and sexual wellness and health as well. So how do you help men in this space?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, again, it almost comes back to the confidence, right? I can only work with men who have the confidence to come to me and say, I'm having a problem. But because we live in a culture that does have a lot of toxic masculinity, a lot of men will also internalize guilt and shame if they can't perform as they think they should as men. So if anyone comes to me, I'm always like, well done. Like, you should be so proud of yourself that you are actually having a conversation about it. That's the first challenge when I work with men. And it's often psychosomatic. So there's the emotional issues as well with having erectile dysfunction and what that means in terms of an identity that I work through. And then there's the physical. And because of my limitations as a sexologist, usually I will talk about what the physical options could be, but I do refer to physios and to doctors as well. But pelvic floor health is the most important thing for men when it comes to erectile dysfunction, because the penis is a muscle and it needs to be supported. And if you stop having physical sexual intimacy for a long time, which can happen in midlife because maybe you have a partner that is going through menopause and also doesn't really want it or isn't initiating, then the two of you, it's easier to avoid. You might stop having physical sexual intimacy and you'll end up losing a lot of that muscle strength in the pelvic floor. And that strength is not just important for erectile function, it's also important for continence as we age, bladder control. There are a lot of reasons why men also need to be aware of the pelvic floor, and to have some useful strategies from a physio is very helpful for that. And I've had a conversation with Colin Simmons, who's the co-founder of Joint Dynamics that we were just talking about. And he's very open-minded when it comes to that. No, that's fine. And yeah, so there's the physical, the emotional, but also having hormones tested for men is important, because if you have low testosterone, it can also be a sign of a tumor in the pituitary gland in the brain. So that is connected to erectile dysfunction. And erectile dysfunction is also connected to cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular issues, because as your tissue is breaking down, the tissue in the penis is a lot softer than the tissue in the heart. So that's going to break down first. So that's why it can be a really important sign of a huge red flag within the body. But because of internalized toxic masculinity, which unfortunately we do still live in a culture that does propagate a lot of these harmful messages, a lot of men are not empowered to talk about it, or they don't know that the help is actually available. And so that's something that makes me proud to talk about these things in public, because I feel like there are not many accessible avenues for men to learn about these things. So there's a few strategies I've just put in there, but I think definitely if you're experiencing erectile dysfunction, the key message is that it could be a sign of something much bigger than just erectile dysfunction. Not that that's not worthy of having your hormones tested in and of itself, but definitely feel empowered to speak to a doctor, to have your hormones tested. And the clinic where I work, Neo Health, that's a clinic that specializes in sexual health. So it's inclusive, it's for all bodies, and that's a space where you could go to access that sort of support.
Amazing. Thank you. So, we've talked a lot about relationships, women going through midlife and the changes of the body, and then men going through the changes in their body. And, moving into this space, and we obviously live in Hong Kong, there's a lot of divorce that happens at this stage of life, but there's also just a lot of single people living colourful sexual lives, and there's also the apps that a lot of people are on. And in addition to taking care of your pelvic floor and knowing what you like, what else do we need to consider as people who are enjoying sexuality in their midlife as a single person? What else do we have to take care of?
Yeah, I love that we're talking about this too. There's something I want to mention, which I forgot to mention before, which ties into this. So there's some really fascinating research that's coming out that shows that menopausal women who experience greater intimacy experience less severe menopausal symptoms. And that intimacy is typically tied to physical sexual intimacy. So they're having more sex. And that demographic of women who are experiencing greater physical sexual intimacy are single women. They're the ones that are saying, menopause, it's not that bad. Is it as bad as how other people are saying? And that's because, women who are having the reduced physical sexual intimacy are typically in longer term committed relationships where you may not be having as much sex as you would be if you were single and dating. So women who are dating, who might be having more colorful dating lives, actually have an advantage when it comes to the aging process. Yeah. It is something, isn't it? I find that so fascinating. That
it's good to know.
Yeah. We do live in a society that still really pushes the values of long-term committed relationships and marriage, and I'm married, and so I do believe in a lot of that, but we don't seek out information to learn from people who are not married. And actually there's so much value in following the journeys of single women and single men and how they experience aging and midlife and relationships, because there are a lot of positives coming out of that research. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So I was unfortunate I've always gone for my pap smears. So when you are sexually active, and even if you're not sexually active as a woman, you have to continue with your sexual health or your, female health. And I was unfortunately misdiagnosed. And when I was with cervical cancer, I was misdiagnosed at a pap smear, which then 14 months later, I had a 3-centimeter tumor. And, I learned that I had HPV, and I was 32 years old with 3 degrees, and I'd never heard of the word. And I suppose our generation were not vaccinated against HPV, which kills women. Even if you have one sexual partner, you can still contract HPV. So it's not that you're promiscuous, it's not that you're dirty, it's just an immune issue and things like that. So for women in this space, and men are carriers of HPV, but they're silent carriers. You don't experience the same symptoms as women. And so it's important for women to keep on top of their pap smears. So even at 30 years and above, where you may not have been vaccinated against HPV, you can still get vaccinated. It's not as foolproof as it is if you're 12 years old, because our children will now get vaccinated against it, and it will hopefully save their lives. But you can now still get vaccinated, but always go for a pap smear once a year. It's so important. Pay for it. Don't worry about it. Don't get all nervous about it. It will save your life. So that's really important, and I would really like to say that and take that away. And the Karen Lung Foundation are doing some excellent work in this space with the pap smears, the education on cervical cancer and gynecological cancers, because it's important that you protect yourself from disease and infection, and enjoy sex and enjoy what it's supposed to mean, and to keep you symptom-ish free during the menopause. That's happy days. And also Vera will touch on the use of condoms and the lubrication of condoms, which is incredible as well. But using a condom, even if you cannot get pregnant, if you are over the age of menopause, it is still important to use a condom if you are practicing sex once a week with different partners, because that can save your life. And that's both through the vagina, the anus and the mouth, because you can get HPV in those three places. So do enjoy having fun, but in a safe way. And I feel like that's something that in midlife we actually don't get taught about, and nobody talks about it. So it is really important to bring this into the conversation, as well as the confidence to talk about what we like. Have the confidence to say, please put a condom on, and carry them yourself. Know what you like in the type of condom that you like as well, if you are enjoying sex with regularly, with more than one person.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important to share stories like this, because I think it's very true that in midlife we can become quite complacent with sexual health. It's almost like it's just associated with being a young person's game, or if you're in a marriage, a single person's game. But you might be in an open marriage, you might have an arrangement where you are open to that. So it's important to stay on top of those checks. There's something else I wanted to jump into. I'm just thinking about the time, because I noticed you changed the slide.
5 minutes left. 5 minutes.
For Q&A as well?
5 minutes for Q&A, yeah.
Okay, just very quickly. I'm not like a kink practitioner. It's not like an area of expertise, but there's research that's come out, because we're talking about intimacy in midlife. And what couples come to me for in midlife is also not just the health challenges, but they want to rediscover or revive or reconnect with intimacy, and they don't know where to start. So talking about different ways that we can experience sexuality is also sometimes a conversation about kink practices and being able to invite different senses into a relationship. And research has shown that couples who do actually experience more kink play in their relationships have higher levels of dopamine and oxytocin, which are the hormones for love that we would associate with that, and lower levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone, than couples who don't. So there are a lot of mental and physical and emotional well-being elements to being creative and playful when it comes to sex. And that's really important in midlife, especially when we have dips in our hormones, where we do want a bit of a dopamine kick, right? We do want a bit of a sense of adventure. So that's something that I also empower couples and individuals with as well, specifically in midlife too.
And I think, look, my parents have been married for 47 years, and I don't honestly know how. But if you think about the length of time that, couples can spend in a marriage together, you have to start reinventing. You have to start reintroducing new things. And you go through phases. We all go through seasons in life in general. And I like to think that, you go through seasons. It's, in a relationship, because it's not perfect all the time. And it shouldn't be doom and gloom all the time as well. So seeking help when you need to, I feel is really important. But also this newsreader in the UK put out, somebody asked her, like, you've been with your husband for 30 odd years, how have you made it work? And she was a news anchor, and she said, well, we scheduled in sex. And she got ridiculed. And I thought, that's bloody brilliant. Because if you actually make the time for it, then you have the anticipation for it. Then you get dressed up and you look forward to it, rather than you put the kids to bed and you're expected to put out and you're like, no. Actually, then you may enjoy it more. You may enjoy that anticipatory, that little flutter as if you were going on a first date again, you know? So actually scheduling it in might sound a bit boring, but it
works.
It can work as
I've
well,
seen it
yeah.
work. Yeah.
And so I
it's
thought
great.
that was brilliant. Now I need to schedule stuff in, yeah. Does anybody have any questions before we allow Vera to take the microphone? Shall I just pull out maybe one or two from here? Yeah? Okay. How do you reignite fancy in your partner? Ooh, that's a good one. God, that's tough.
Well, I think
I don't know the
I
answer
think
to that.
what we were just talking about is relevant to that. It's about like reigniting an experience and connection. So novelty is important, you know, and not maybe there was something about fancying, right?
Yeah. How do you like reignite fancy in your partner? Like when you see them every day and they're like,
Yeah.
you know, both. I'm talking about both partners here, where you're doing things that the other partner's like, oh my God, did they just do that?
Yeah.
Like, how do you get out? And I suppose personally, it's getting out of that space, getting dressed up, going to a nice restaurant, having a bit of a romantic night, maybe going on a trip together, going on a staycation, you know, doing things outside the home, because the home is where you're supposed to feel safest to be your wholeheartedly entire self, and actually getting dressed up to feel different and sexy and, you know, putting a little bit of romance into it. That's how, you know, that makes me feel, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the brain is the largest sexual organ, and the brain needs novelty, and we need stimulation. And if you have ADHD, that's even more important. So definitely, you know, everything starts up here, and creating new experiences and new opportunities to develop these new neural pathways is so important. Yeah.
Oh, this is a long question. What are your tips for getting in the mood if you really don't feel like it, but know it's for the best for your relationship? Good question. So, sometimes I feel getting in the mood, actually when you're doing it, it's actually really cool. Like the thought of doing it is harder than doing it itself, and when you're in it you actually really enjoy it. Maybe you just want to go to bed and read your book. Both partners, or you know, you want to scroll on whatever, but actually when you start to kiss and you start to get into it, then it does work out to be okay. Like you just give in and go with the flow.
It's a really good
because
question.
it's not all about you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And firstly, I think if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. Don't do it. If you don't want to do it, you shouldn't feel pressured. You shouldn't feel forced. And if someone is forcing you or making you feel guilty about not having sex, then that is something to really consider in a relationship. Is that healthy? Probably not. So there is an element of being in a relationship, and also, you know, giving and receiving goes both ways. So if you're in a situation where you feel like you want to give it, but you're not in the mood, that's a little bit different, right? So definitely prioritizing your pleasure and what's going to make you feel good so that you relax and you want to engage in sex is really important. What's going to make you feel good? Go in that direction. And
yeah, but in midlife, like, you know, it can be ongoing that you're not in the mood. So sometimes you just have to go with it. Yeah.
So maybe scheduling is a good option, because it's like you've got something locked in. You can take the pressure off yourself to have to deliver at a time when you don't want to. And you can build anticipation. And you know that you've got that time for shared physical intimacy to enjoy how you both want to. That doesn't even mean you have to have sex at that time. There's also pressure with that. So I think scheduling intimacy, if you do have a very busy life, and that's one of the challenges, is very helpful in that way. But yeah, I always come back to don't do it if you don't feel like you have to. And I'm sure, well, I can't say I'm sure actually, but there are many women who internalize this guilt because of the roles that we have in society to be givers. So And there's a presumption that, oh, it's probably a woman and it's probably a man. But sometimes it's the other way around. So there are also a lot of assumptions that we make about givers and receivers and who wants it and who doesn't want it that we do need to unpack as a culture as well. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
We'll answer more questions after. Going to pass over to the wonderful Vera. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to keep it quick. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Mary, for the wonderful conversations. And thank you for having me here and the 1880 team back there. Hi. My name is Vera. I'm a certified sexuality educator, and I've been teaching about sex for the past 14 years in kindergarten, in primary school, and even in high school and university. And also in my shop, Sally Coco, which we've got some products over there. That's why they invited me over to talk to you about the importance of lube and vaginal moisturizer. I'm just gonna keep it on this topic because there are other things that can help in midlife, but it would be a rabbit hole to dive into. The reason why I want to put it out there for lube, want to talk about lube today, because a lot of us have a misconception of why we use lube and why can we use lube and what type of lubes is actually good for you. Remember the lady who was sitting here and she said nothing is helping? And I actually wanted, if she stayed for my presentation, she will know that the reason why that something was not helping because it was not formulated for women, by women, you know? Company may make products that are like really low cost, but it's actually not good for you, and I'm not gonna tell you why. So when it comes to lubrication, we actually have to think about osmolality. Have you everyone heard of that? What is that, right? It's a chemical term. It basically is describing how thick a lubricant is, or how, like even for a gel, how thick that gel is. So osmolality, okay? So in 中文, like in Chinese, it's 滲透壓, okay? So this is a scientific photo to show you the relationship of a product, which now we're talking about lubricant or vaginal moisturizer, and our mucous membrane. So this little thing here is the mucous membrane, the cell of that, and this is the product. And when it comes to lubricant or vaginal moisturizer, there are actually different osmolality. So if the product is hypoosmotic, what that means is it has a lower osmolality. What you need to remember is the product will give lots of moisture to your cell. And what it does is it will pop the cell, okay? So it will damage the cell. And that's what's gonna happen if you put something like that in your vagina. Okay, so if a product has a higher osmolality, it is a hyperosmotic product, then the cell, the moisture of the cell gets sucked up into the product, which in this case is a lubricant, and it dries your cells. So that's why a lot of women have used conventional lubrication or vaginal moisturizer, and it's not helping because what you find in the market are mostly these kind of products. So the more you use it, you're thinking that it's lubricating or moisturizing, but it's not. It's actually sucking all the moisture from your cells. So what you want is actually a similar osmolality between the product itself and also your cell. And our vaginal moisture, vaginal secretion actually does that. That's why, our own lubrication that we have in our vagina when we're not having vaginal dryness is actually doing this. Like what it does is it has a similar osmolality. So the product lubricates the cell lubricates the products. It goes like a circle. So nothing gets dry, nothing gets pop, just like that. And according to WHO, a female vaginal secretion is within this range, right? And a human semen is within this range. So an ideal lubrication should be less than 380. So you don't have to remember all this science. I know like your face is like, what is going on? But I'm going to show you a graph. So what commercial personal lubrication that you find in like all the pharmacies, most of them are within 2,000 to 6,000. Like look at her face, just like, what? what? Yes, all the Durex, all the whatever products you find out there, all the KY jelly, don't put it in your vagina, ladies. So this is a research. Someone did a research on this. So this is a research that is done in 2016, and they measure all the osmolality level. Well, the research was done in UK. So these are all the over-the-counter products in the UK. So some of them you can also find it in Hong Kong, right? You can find it in Manning and Watson's, and the good old KY jelly. Where is the KY jelly? Wait. Here, the good old KY jelly is 2007, ladies and gentlemen. And the Durex Play lubricant that you can find in most of the supermarket is 1,500. That's why a lot of times when you use a lubrication and it's not helping, it's because it's sucking all the moisture from your cell. And what happens is your vagina, because the cell is all dried up, it will be more prone to BV and vaginal infections and yeast infection and whatnot, and even HPV infections as well. So that's why when it comes to lubrication and vaginal moisturizer to use in your midlife, you gotta remember, pick one that is in a lower but not too low osmolality range, like which is less than 380 tours over there, okay? And when it comes to vaginal moisturizer, the same as well. So this is all a lot of the over-the-counter products that is designed for vaginal dryness, but not all of them are osmolality balanced to fit your vagina. And after osmolality, we're going to talk about pH. So when it comes to vaginal moisturizer and lube, you want one that is fitting pH balance to your vagina. What that means is it's got to be pH 3.8 to 4.5, and the vagina will be happy, okay? Because our vaginal canal or our vulva is naturally kind of towards the acidic balanced. And the reason why we have yeast infection, we have BV, is because the balance got upset. And the balance got upset maybe because of the products you put inside yourself, or maybe because of your immune system, and also going through menopause, right? So that's why we want to keep it as a little slightly acidic, just like our tonic soda. Okay, so these are all the pH balance over-the-counter products you can find, and like the KY jelly is a little towards the edge of 4.45, 4.49, and the Durex is like 5.48. Like it's a little too alkaline for the vagina. So you want to find something that is in the middle, like about 4, that's good. And these are all the moisturizer that is in the market, and there's a research done on that as well. So that's why today we brought you some good lubrication that is pH balanced to the vagina, and also osmolality is fit to that as well. And it's called a Yes lubrication. The product is developed by 2 ladies in UK, and one of them is actually a chemist that was on the team of developing Viagra. I want to tell you this story. So she was on the team who developed the Viagra, and then after Viagra came out, she was one of the team members, but she realized a lot of older men are now able to enjoy their sex life wherever they want to, but their partners are women mostly going through menopause. And they want to develop a product that is specifically designed to help older women enjoy sex, enjoy pleasure, right? So they first developed a water-based lubricant, and it became super helpful. It even got onto, there's like a guide that is for doctor to recommend products for the patient or medicine for the patient. So they actually got on that list. So whenever people go to the UK gynecologist to say that, oh, I got vaginal dryness, blah, 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 and then the doctor would recommend this product to them. And later on, because a lot of women are actually using their lubricant as a moisturizer, then they develop a vaginal moisturizer as well. And the molecule releases the moisture slower. so that once you squeeze it in, it can stay in the vagina for 3 days, and whenever it dries, it releases the moisture. So this is a good loop and also a good moisturizer for anyone who is experiencing that. I hope I give you a quick peek on how choosing the right products can actually help elevate your sexuality during midlife. And over there at our table, we also got some books, Kegel exercisers, dilators, and even the, like, let's say if your vaginal canal gets shorter, we also have products for that as well. Yeah, and so come visit us in Central whenever you guys are around, and feel free to take a screenshot of this so that you can come get it. Oh, and there's some samples over there, so you can get it too. Thank you. I hope I share some.
All right, thank you guys. That was, I'm sure, very insightful for everyone. Feel free to, have a couple more drinks, speak with Lisa and Mary. I'm sure they'll be here for a little bit longer and you can catch them. But thank you, everyone, for coming to our first talk in the space. And we hope to see you back for many more.